China's falling apart in the most bizarre way possible. Dead bodies are disappearing from graves, mortuaries, and medical institutions all over the country, causing a mass uproar. In a morbid and dark situation taken straight from a horror movie, Chinese citizens are missing and losing the bodies of their dead families. And this could all be part of a scheme that the CCP is now desperately trying to cover up.
A social media post shining a light on the business of turning human remains into profit in China. A Chinese lawyer posted an indictment on the country's largest social media platform last Thursday.
In northern China, prosecutors have uncovered a disturbing decade-long scheme involving the illegal sale of corpses meant for cremation.
It accused a Chinese company of illegally procuring thousands of bodies nationwide, then, quote, brutally dismembering them and culling flesh from bones.
With thousands of corpses missing and an elaborate multi-million-dollar theft scheme in place, the situation has developed into nothing less than a nationwide scandal. Today, we'll explore the origins and development of this terrible scandal. We'll also go over the impact it's had on Chinese society, and how the CCP's reign might come to an end because of it. As we dive into the underbelly of China's dark trafficking roots, we do so fully aware that any videos that talk about the CCP or Chinese failings tend to get swarmed with negative comments from bots as a CCP strategy to stop the spread of information that they might view as harmful to their image. That's why your likes are necessary, as they combat these bots and allow us to share these videos without fear or prejudice. So please drop a like. Okay, with that said, let's move on. Thousands of bodies have been illegally trafficked, dismembered, and sold to produce medical materials, and Chinese society is slowly learning about this. As we look into the modern implications of this scandal, it's first necessary that we take a step back into history. The origins of this issue of illegal human trade in China date back several decades, with various forms of trafficking taking place long before the modern era. Historically, China, like many other countries, has fought with a dark past filled with exploitation of vulnerable groups, including women, children, and ethnic minorities especially. We've made a video on this in the past, so feel free to browse the channel for it. In any case, this exploitation took the form of forced labor, sex trafficking, and, in more recent times, organ trafficking. In the late 20th century, as China began to open up its economy and modernize, the demand for human organs, particularly for transplants, began to rise sharply. This was due in part to advances in medical technology and a growing awareness of the benefits of organ transplants for treating various life-threatening conditions. When you factor in these things were happening in a country with a massive population that served as both the client and, for a lack of a better word, the material, it's easy to see why the illegal organ trafficking ring grew so quickly. That's why by the 1980s and 1990s, China had become a major player in the global organ trade. The country's rapid economic growth led to an increase in wealth and, consequently, a rise in demand for medical treatments that could extend life. However, China's cultural and religious beliefs about death, which often discouraged organ donation, meant that there was a significant shortage of legally donated organs. So, what can you imagine happens when we have massive demand and minimal legal supply? You probably guessed right. It resulted in the birth of the organ black market. During this period, there was a quick development of an illegal market where organs were sourced from less than ethical means. The most controversial and internationally condemned practice at the time was harvesting the organs from executed prisoners. For years, it was an open secret that China used the organs of prisoners who had been sentenced to death, often without their or their family's consent, to supply its booming transplant industry. As you can imagine, the CCP initially denied these allegations as best they could, but mounting evidence from human rights organizations, journalists, and former prisoners began to expose the extent of the practice. It was reported that prisoners were often executed in such a way that their organs could be harvested immediately, ensuring their viability for transplantation. Given the way the CCP operates, it's likely that many who were imprisoned were there simply because of political freedoms, ethnicity, or other irrelevant factors, and yet found themselves being the food source for a whole dark underground arena. In fact, the whole concept of imprisonment for certain groups of people might have existed just to cover up such deeds. Such unfortunate victim groups, including the Falun Gong spiritual movement and other religious and ethnic minorities like the Uyghurs and Tibetans, were being killed for their organs. It's so sick and infuriating. According to these reports, Falun Gong practitioners who've been persecuted by the Chinese government since 1999 are targeted because of their healthy lifestyles, making their organs particularly desirable. The condemnation of these deeds by the international community is why several countries banned organ tourism to China, where foreigners travel to receive transplants, often with little knowledge of the organ's origins. After facing mounting international pressure, China announced a series of reforms in the early 2010s aimed at curbing illegal organ trafficking. In 2015, the Chinese government claimed to have stopped using organs from executed prisoners, transitioning to a voluntary organ donation system. This would be great and welcome news, had it not been for the dead bodies disappearing scandal that's brought us here now. From where I'm sitting, it seems like all they did was change strategies, as I'll explain in a few minutes. Still, on that subject of trafficking, I think it's important to note that organ trafficking is just one facet of the broader human trafficking problem in China. Now, before we get into that, I quickly wanted to answer a question I recently got asked. A lot of you guys want to start a YouTube channel, but you're camera shy, or just not comfortable putting your face out there. In fact, I'm one of those people, and that's why this channel has no face on it. Luckily, you can still grow on YouTube even without showing your face or giving up your privacy. This channel's the living proof of that. In fact, here are just a few examples of channels that started in the last 12 months and grew an audience without showing their face. They've gotten millions of views and made thousands of dollars from them. We recently crossed 1 million subscribers, and along the way we've learned a few tips and tricks about YouTube that can be helpful to any of you who want to start your channel. We've included all of this in my completely free 7-day YouTube crash course bootcamp. So if you're someone who's interested in starting a YouTube channel, this is the perfect starting point for you. What better way to convince you than to read a comment left by a previous student? This bootcamp's better than a paid course he took. So if you're interested in signing up, you can sign up now for free by clicking the link in the description or scanning the QR code on screen. The country has long struggled with various forms of human exploitation, including forced labor, sex trafficking, and the abduction and sale of women and children. Rural poverty, gender imbalances due to the one-child policy, and lax law enforcement have all contributed to the prevalence of these practices. In rural areas, there have been numerous cases of women being kidnapped and sold as brides to men who, due to gender imbalance, are unable to find wives. Children, too, are often abducted and sold, either for adoption or for forced labor. The Chinese government has taken steps to combat human trafficking, but the scale of the problem and the involvement of organized crime make it a difficult issue to tackle effectively. Okay, with the history and background context out of the way, let's move on to the meat of how the dead body scandal has rocked China and the world this year. Everything began to unravel earlier this year when several reports and investigations exposed a network involved in the illegal trade of human remains. Several families in rural areas of China began to report that the bodies of their deceased relatives had mysteriously vanished from local funeral homes. These families, who naturally were expecting to carry out traditional burial ceremonies, were instead met with empty caskets and unconvincing explanations from funeral home staff. These families began to raise the alarm, seeking answers from local authorities. Unfortunately, the initial investigations by local police were slow and, in some cases, dismissive, with officials attributing the missing bodies to administrative errors or mishandling by funeral home staff. As this issue continued, mounting evidence of similar incidents in other regions started coming to light, forcing authorities to take the issue more seriously. With the matter now in the open, those with a knack for reporting took up arms and started diving into it. One key figure was Yi Shenghua, a lawyer who initially exposed the illegal activities on Weibo, China's social media platform. Despite efforts by the government to censor information and control the narrative, the story gained traction, leading to a broader investigation. As these investigative journalists and law enforcement dug deeper into the reports, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. This dark network, which stretched across several provinces, was primarily driven by the demand for bones and other body parts used in medical research, education, and the production of allogenic bone implants. The investigation revealed that some funeral homes, crematoriums, and even hospital morgues were complicit, and there were no administrative errors like previously reported, but a conscious awareness of what was happening. These institutions, often under financial pressure or influenced by corrupt officials, had been selling people's dead bodies to middlemen, who would then traffic the remains to buyers in the medical and pharmaceutical industries. The bodies were often dismembered, and the bones were processed into materials used in surgeries and other medical procedures. I don't know how you feel about this, but it's utterly despicable. One of the organizations behind this, Shanxi Aurori Biomaterials Company, is a major company in the medical materials industry in Taiyuan, the capital of Shanxi Province. After the bodies were cut up, they were sent for processing at this company. Over 4,000 corpses were traced to them, with estimates saying that Shanxi Aurori Biomaterials Company had pocketed around $53 million since 2015. During this investigation, the police seized more than 18 tons of human bone, raw materials, and semi-finished products, along with over 34,000 finished products from the involved companies. These are no small numbers. To acquire a large quantity of raw materials, Shanxi Aurori instructed employees to transport human bones from places like Guilin, Guangxi, and Chengdu, Sichuan. The bodies were selected and processed at Anatomy Teaching and Office Research in Guilin Medical University and Sichuan Hengpu Company before being transported back to the company for storage. To conceal their dealings, Shanxi Aurori forged documents, including voluntary body donation registration forms and inspection reports. Employees were also instructed to forge signatures on the donation forms, pretending to be family members. As more of the scheme came to light, the company's executives and several employees were arrested. The uncovering of this despicable scheme has placed the CCP under international scrutiny. To do some damage control, they dismissed several high-ranking officials in the regions where missing corpses had been reported, and also appointed a nationwide task to investigate the extent of the trade. The CCP has also tightened the regulations surrounding the handling of human remains and increased oversight of funeral homes and medical institutions. Even after all this damage control, public trust in the government and the medical industry has been severely shaken. Many people felt that the scandal was indicative of deeper systematic issues, including widespread corruption and a lack of transparency in how human remains are handled. Social media platforms like Weibo were flooded with posts expressing outrage and demanding justice for the families affected by the scandal. In response to the outcry, the CCP has been actively censoring such posts and trying to control the narrative. Again, your like on this video will help us out a lot. It makes you quite grateful for the modern age and the transfer of information. Such atrocities must be exposed without failure. On top of the local public outcry, there have been strong reactions from the international community as well. This scandal has further damaged China's reputation in the global medical industry, particularly in the area of organ and tissue transplants. Many of you are wondering what would fuel such wickedness, so I'll get into that now. Money is the root of all evil here because, as you probably guessed it, the primary driver is economic profit. The medical industry is highly lucrative, and the demand for human bones as raw materials is substantial. Companies like Shanxi Aurori have made millions by selling these materials to hospitals and clinics, which then use them in various surgical procedures. Some people are willing to cross any line for money, and this proves that. Outside of the obvious money motivator, another reason is the massive gaps in regulation. Let me explain. You see, while China has laws governing the handling of human remains, enforcement is often weak and people take advantage of this. That's why this lack of transparency and oversight in the funeral and medical industries further worsens the problem, making it difficult to track the source of human remains and ensure that they're handled ethically. Coupled with this lack of oversight is the corruption and complicity within the system. The involvement of government officials and institutions suggests that there's a network of individuals who are either turning a blind eye to illegal activities or actively participating in them. There's simply no way companies like Shanxi or Biomaterials could run such a deep and nationwide program for close to 10 years without some red flags popping up. The fact that this has gone on for so long simply means that certain officials are complicit. Lastly, the scandal's happening due to cultural practices that exist within China. You see, in China, attitudes towards death and body donation are complicated and often influenced by traditional beliefs. Many people are reluctant to donate their bodies to science or for medical purposes, leading to a shortage of legally available bodies for research and medical use. They believe that doing such has spiritual repercussions, and so that shortage of organs has created an illegal market. Please don't get me wrong, I'm not victim blaming here. Not at all. I'm simply showing you how the imbalance of supply and demand has heightened the evils in Chinese society. Now, let's take a look at the possible implications that this scandal's created. After all, a scenario where people are profiting on the corpses of the dead is bound to have some dangers and implications, don't you think? Firstly, just looking at the ethical side of this illegal corpse trade, it doesn't take a judge to see that the desecration of human remains is a serious violation of human dignity. The idea that bodies, which should be treated with respect and care, are being dismembered and sold for profit is deeply troubling. This terrible act not only disrespects the deceased, but their families too. Also, from a health perspective, the use of illegally sourced human bones in medical procedures poses significant risks. There's no guarantee that these materials are safe or properly sanitized, increasing the likelihood of infections or complications during surgery. Considering that because there's no oversight over these bones and materials, there's no standard of health outside what the criminals themselves set. One of the biggest consequences, and the one we've documented clearly, is public outrage. The censorship by the CCP has only made things worse, and this scandal has completely eroded public trust. On the topic of loss of trust, this scandal's also removed the faith in China's medical industry. From here, if the public loses trust in the safety and integrity of medical products, it could lead to a decline in the use of certain treatments, potentially affecting the overall quality of healthcare. The international reputation of China's medical industry may also suffer more than it already has, particularly if other countries become wary of using Chinese-made medical products. As if all that's not enough, this scandal's also sparked a broader debate about the ethics of organ donation in China, with many calling for a complete overhaul of the system and stricter enforcement of the existing laws. I don't have all the answers, but let us throw in some suggestions for the CCP. First and foremost, enforcement of regulations needs to be strengthened. The government must close legal loopholes that allow companies to operate illegally and ensure that existing laws are rigorously enforced. This could include stricter licensing requirements for companies involved in the handling of human remains and more frequent inspections of funeral homes and medical institutions. In addition to this, public awareness and education are also necessary, if not crucial. Many people may not be aware of the risks associated with illegal body trade or the importance of ethical practices in the medical industry. A nationwide campaign to educate the public about these issues could help to reduce the demand for illegally sourced bodies and encourage more people to consider legal body donation. Once people understand the dangers of contamination and health on top of the legal punishment, many might not be in a hurry to go down that dark, scandalous path. Finally, there needs to be greater accountability and transparency within the CCP itself. Corruption and complicity in the illegal trade must be addressed, and those responsible should be held accountable with no exceptions. This may require an independent investigation into the scandal and the establishment of a watchdog agency to oversee the handling of human remains and prevent future abuses. So, where does this all leave us? Well, this scandal of missing corpses in China is a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked corruption and the illegal trade in human remains. It's exposed significant flaws in the system and has led to a crisis of public trust that the CCP will need to address urgently. The ongoing investigations and the potential for further revelations mean that this story is far from over, and its impact will likely be felt for years to come.